The union budget is less than a week away. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman stands on the cusp of history. On the 23rd of July, she will become the first finance minister in India's history to present 7 consecutive union budgets. India Inc. is hoping the government will continue to expand capital expenditure while adhering to the fiscal consolidation roadmap. FICCI is calling for Capex to be hiked by 25% to 11.8 lakh crore rupees, also calling for a status quo on corporate tax. The industry body is also batting for revamping the goods and services tax. It's calling for a 3-slab structure and changes to ensure smoother operations of the input tax credit regime. Businesses are also hoping the government will operationalize the 1 lakh crore rupee corpus to bolster research and innovation, which was announced in the interim budget. A review of the current patent laws is also on the wish list, which is a long one covering MSMEs, agri-tourism and a lot more. Joining me now to discuss the FICCI wish list and what India Inc. wants from the budget is Anish Shah, the president of FICCI and the Group MD and CEO at Mahindra Group, Anant Goenka, the vice president at FICCI and the vice chairman of RPG Group, Harsha Vardhan Agarwal, the senior vice president at FICCI and the MD of Emami, and Subhrakant Panda, the former president of FICCI and the MD of Indian Metals and Ferro Alloys Limited. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the program. Anish, to you first. You know, in December, the finance minister, just ahead of the interim budget, speaking at another industry event, had said, look, temper your expectations. This is a vote on account. It's an interim budget. Don't expect spectacular announcements. The expectation now is that since that was a matter of fact vote on account in 56 minutes that the finance minister delivered, will this budget deliver on the so-called spectacular announcements? What are you hoping for, Anish?
Shereen, first, pleasure being here with you. We are hoping for a continuation of the development-focused agenda. We've been very fortunate that over the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen a very strong development-focused agenda. Capex growth from the government has been significantly increased. It was up 37% last year, and that will set the industry very well for long-term growth. It will set up India very well in terms of being a competitive global power, and that has resulted in a number of benefits with regard to spend on infrastructure, actions that will eventually reduce the cost of manufacturing in India, actions that will also help improve farm productivity. So all of these things have been set up over the last few years in the right way. We would expect that to continue. And in fact, in many ways, that is more important than any spectacular announcements.
Yes, continuity is more important than spectacular announcements. And I think if one looks at the complexion of this government, that is what the Prime Minister has done. It is virtually the same set of ministers across some of the key portfolios, including the Finance Ministry, where we do have Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman creating history by presenting the 7th consecutive budget. But Anant Goenka, you know, let's talk about what has changed since the interim budget. And the 2 significant factors that are different since the time that the interim budget were presented is that tax collections are even stronger, and you have that RBI bonanza coming in, a higher dividend than what was factored in by the government. In fact, a significantly higher dividend than what was factored in by the government. That's on the math side. On the political side, of course, there is a mandate where the government or the BJP has lost majority. And the question is whether that is going to weigh on the mind of the finance minister and on this budget in any form or fashion. How do you see this balance moving forward?
Right. I think it's a great situation that the government is in today, where they do have some good tax collections as well as dividends. So they do have the space, and we hope that they will continue to do the capital investments that they have been doing. We hope to see an increase in Capex plans because of the multiplier effect that comes in, employment generation that happens, as well as impact on manufacturing because of improvement in logistics, etc., that come in. So I think that is one big expectation as a result of the investment that is there. Second is, I think that employment generation will be a top priority for the government. We do have a large number of skilled or people who are ready to be employed. On the other side, we are seeing manufacturing needing people. So skilling will be an important priority, I think, or should be an important priority for the government to make sure we are able to match the skills that the industry needs in some way. We've seen great success of the PLI schemes as well. And once again, to boost manufacturing, some continuity in the PLI schemes with a little bit more focus on labor intensive sectors will certainly help. So these are certainly some areas where we hope that the government will continue that work and only add more over time.
Yes, and the expectation is that while the PLI schemes that are already in different stages will continue, the expectation is that perhaps for labor-intensive sectors, there could be more PLI schemes that will be announced. But Mr. Harsha Vardhan Agarwal, let me come to you now. And I think jobs is an issue. In fact, if you look at the visuals coming in from Mumbai today at the Mumbai airport, a virtual stampede of potential aspirants looking for jobs that are, up for grabs. We're also seeing a dilemma at this point in time with various state governments announcing policies to try and localize jobs. The latest being what the Karnataka government has decided to do is bring in a bill which reserves jobs in the private sector for Karnataka domiciled locals. And this has, of course, led to an uproar, and industry is seeking a review as well as a rethink. Now, as far as this jobs problem and the jobs crisis is concerned, do you believe that the budget is going to try and address that, whether it's through PLI, whether it's through incentives? Other industry bodies are also seeking employment-linked incentives for MSMEs, etc. Do you believe that the budget will address the jobs issue?
I believe so. I think for the government, inclusive growth is an important agenda. And from that perspective, employment generation is very, very important. And for that, obviously, the Capex, which the government has been doing, that is certainly one way of increasing the employment, which the government will and should continue and, in fact, increase the Capex spend. Apart from that, the PLI scheme, that we were talking about, and as Anant was saying, whether it can be more focused on few sectors which are more labor intensive. So these are few of the initiatives, which will certainly help the employment. And I do believe, it is amongst as one of the important agenda for the government.
Yes, it certainly will be an important agenda for the government. Subhrakant Panda, let's talk about what the expectations now are, specifically as far as the manufacturing side is concerned. The hope is that there will be a status quo on rates specifically, but do you expect the government to announce any policy changes, whether it is to do with simplification, ease of doing business, etc., to try and ensure that we continue to attract both domestic capital as well as foreign capital specifically towards manufacturing?
So, Shereen, we have spent a lot of time talking in the past and about the importance of the manufacturing sector for India. And, while the services sector has done very well, there is absolutely no doubt that manufacturing also needs to come into play in a big way to ensure that we are able to absorb all the young women and men coming into the workforce. So from that point of view, I think a continuation of what has been done in the past, which is a focus on enhancing the ease of doing business, on reducing the cost of doing business. I think these are two very, very important initiatives which must continue. And in fact, just the other day at the FICCI and ECM, the Commerce Minister was also talking about wanting more suggestions from industry on how these simplifications could be brought about. That apart, I think, generally what will be beneficial for the manufacturing sector is the Capex spend, because that has a multiplier effect, that has a knock-on effect. But if I were to talk specifically about expectations from the budget, there has been some indications about addressing in certain cases where there is duty inversion. Of course, the difficulty is that in some cases that duty inversion is because of legacy FTAs. But nevertheless, duty inversion wherever that is, needs to be addressed in the best manner possible. And finally, I would say that PLI schemes have done very well and should continue. And as Harsha also alluded to, to identify new sectors where there could be more of an impact. Well, let's say, for example, the component ecosystem for some of these sectors which have done well. But at the end of the day, what I hope is that that the government keeps in mind that PLI are limited time interventions and are not a panacea overall for for all that needs to be done to ensure that the manufacturing sector ticks along as smoothly as it possibly can.
No, and I think that is conceptually the idea as far as the PLI schemes are concerned. There is a sunset clause for the PLI scheme. But Anish, let me come back to you now and talk about some of the areas where clarity is required now or is awaited on further allocations. For instance, FAME 3 and the Heavy Industries Minister speaking to us just yesterday did indicate that cabinet approval is awaited as far as the FAME 3 scheme is concerned. I don't, Anish, are you being able to hear me? We'll get to Anish in just a second. Let me get Anant in on that. So Anant, FAME 3, a question mark on the allocation. The Heavy Industries Minister seemed to indicate that cabinet approval is pending now. We spoke with the principal scientific advisor who said that they estimate that from an R&D perspective for electric mobility, they require about 1,200 crore rupees, which various ministries are expected to pool together. But this is, of course, at a discussion stage at this point in time. What would the expectations be specifically on these new industries, on these new sectors, these sunrise nascent sectors? What's the ask?
Right. So on the sunrise sectors, I think the government has shown the way through PLI schemes. As and when the world changes and new sectors come up, we hope such kind of schemes do continue and India can take the leap forward in the world in terms of these sectors. The second is there is about a 1 lakh crore R&D budget that was laid out in the interim budget in February. Some clarity on that would certainly help in areas such as the sunrise sectors, electrification, and so on and so forth. Electric vehicle adoption has not been at the best levels in the country yet. We are still at just about 2-3% of EV adoption at a macro level. So I think there, and again, the impact of electrification goes through on sustainability, new industry, technology, all of that. So I think the FAME 3 will be an important area for the government to provide clarity on to the industry and then accelerate EV growth as well.
Anish, back to you. So, FAME 3, as I said, a question mark on the allocation as well as the contours of the final scheme. The expectation is that it will either be rolled out with the budget or around the same time. And more importantly, some of the other focus areas, we already have a semiconductor mission. The government has put its plan and a roadmap in place as far as an AI mission, etc. is concerned. There is that R&D fund, which is yet to be operationalized that Anant was talking about. What's the expectation across some of these areas that have found mention previously but are yet waiting for clarity on execution?
Shereen, here we expect that there will be clarity, and I must say that the government has done a fantastic job with FAME 2. It has helped transform last mile mobility. If you look at the electric three-wheeler industry in India, as well as the small four-wheelers, the tempos and cargo trucks that deliver both cargo and passengers at the last mile in large cities, the industry has gone from 0% electric to 20% electric literally in 3 to 4 years. And we are confident we will get to 100% electric by 2030. And the set of incentives with FAME 2, hopefully continued in FAME 3 and PLI, are what has helped transform this industry. What is even more important is post-2030, the industry will not need incentives. And this is an exact example of how an incentive should work, which is a specific time period, a transformation that takes place that delivers benefits for India in terms of reducing the fuel import bill, in terms of easing pollution in cities. And this is an example that will translate into other areas as well that we've looked at. And therefore, the expectation is that the government will take such targeted incentives and help drive this transformation.
Well, speaking of targeted incentives, Subhrakant, I want to address the issue of providing a thrust to exports, because that's also part of the recommendations that FICCI has put forward to the government. Now, in the conversations that have happened with the officials at the Finance Ministry as well as with the Finance Minister, what is the indication that you have been given in terms of what the priorities can be? Of course, nobody can talk specifics, but, where the government believes that they need to put their might behind certain sectors and champion certain causes. What's the indication given at this point in time? Exports, I would imagine, will be part of that bucket list.
So, Shereen, undoubtedly exports are a very, very important part of the agenda, because even as we look to make India a global manufacturing hub, it is obviously important that the local, the domestic market, which is very large, which is integrated due to GST reforms, that will play an important role. But there is no doubting the importance of exports in that equation as well. So from that point of view, I think, from a FICCI perspective, what we have also talked about is there are certain, the whole idea of RODTEP, which is meant to do away with the effect of local taxes and duties as far as exports are concerned. Certain sectors have been left out, and there is a case for that to be considered, of course, within the overall budget allocations which are available. That apart, I think there is also more than just incentives for exports. I think it is also important, and I'm going a little bit beyond the budget in at this point in time, but looking at FTAs and things like that, operationalizing that, because today FTAs are not just about about access to each other's markets, but it also involves investments, it involves technology transfer. And all of this ultimately have an important role to play in India climbing up the value chain and becoming the global manufacturing hub. So we do expect a continued focus on all of these things. But I would, sector specific, I think is hard to guess. But I would put my money on on the high potential sectors which can really add to India's export numbers and help bring down whatever deficit there is in that regard.
Well, that is right. And across different sectors, we have seen the government, whether it is move on bringing in more domestic manufacturing, whether it has to do with the electronics sector or even defense, where we've just seen the government release the 5th list for indigenization. But Harsha, let me come now to consumption, because we've been talking a lot about what the government could or may do as far as boosting investment is concerned. But what about consumption? And what we are seeing today play out across FMCG sales, for instance, is that volume growth continues to be tepid, especially as far as the rural pockets are concerned. What's the expectation now in terms of consumption? Do you actually see the government moving on providing more, to specific targeted groups? For instance, PM Kisan, do you expect the allocation there to be enhanced, indexed for inflation? What's the expectation to boost consumption?
I think one of the challenge for the consumption has been the inflation, which has been high due to the geopolitical conditions, etc. So I think, yes, controlling the inflation will certainly help the growth in consumption. Apart from that, the growth in employment or the focus in employment should also help in increase in consumption. This year in rural, the monsoon seems to be good. The predictions are good from the IMD, and hence, that should also help the consumption. Apart from that, whether the government is going to introduce all the initiatives, from the perspective of increasing the consumption, they have taken a lot of initiatives, and I believe, they will continue.
Yes, that is certainly the expectation. Anish, coming back to you now, what's the indication, especially as far as rural demand is concerned? There are concerns that we are seeing car makers like even Mahindra resort to price cuts, etc. What's the expectation on demand, and what's the expectation on measures to boost consumption, especially to deal with the rural economy?
So, Shereen, we are not very concerned about it right now. We've seen some green shoots on the farm side with tractors, And while there has been a lot of focus on the price cut, this is something that we had in fact talked about 6 months ago. And in the cycle of the vehicle, we had taken up prices and then we brought them down slightly beyond that. And that's just for one model based on its current life cycle. So therefore, it's not something that really worries us in terms of consumption. We are seeing a fairly robust economy. We've seen some softness in pockets last year, specifically in rural. We are seeing some signs of that picking up right now. And on balance, I think things are fairly good.
Things are fairly good at this point in time, but and I want to, address the issue of jobs, and I want to go back to that with a concern that industry is grappling with today. And Anish, I'll start by asking you, we've seen a spate of states. It started with states like Haryana, Madhya Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, and now you've got Karnataka moving a bill to ensure that there is reservation in the private sector and, for local domiciled individuals. Now, industry has, of course, reacted, asking for a review and a rethink. But do you believe that this is likely to be, if more and more states were to pursue this policy and ensure that there is local reservation, etc., do you believe that this is going to be a dampener, not just for domestic investment, but also for foreign investment? But it goes against the grain of the ease of doing business and freedom of markets.
Shereen, absolutely right. You summarized it very well. That will be a dampener because anything that's a constraint makes it tougher to do business. And we should actually have more free market. That's what we are in a democracy. That's been the strength of India. And the more regulation we have, the tighter norms we have, the barriers we put in terms of labor force, etc., will only hurt us. So therefore, we would advocate more of an open, free market and practices that make it much easier to do business.
Subhrakant, weigh in on that. We of course have seen labor reforms are pending. The 4 labor codes were cleared, but they're pending in various states across different, areas of execution. And now you've got this business of reservation even in the private sector. Of course, in the case of Haryana, the High Court had struck it down, calling it unconstitutional, and that perhaps will be the hope that industry has that that these provisions will be struck down. But how concerned is industry today, Subhrakant?
So, Shereen, I fully endorse what Anish said, which is that anything which goes against the grain of ease of doing business is something that ought to worry industry. And when we talk about the huge success of GST in breaking down internal barriers to trade, we don't want to put up other barriers which come in the way of efficient functioning. And the concern, of course, with such an approach is that if all the other states were to start emulating it, then where do we go from there? So having said that, it's something that obviously I think one needs to look into deeper. But I also wanted to weigh in a little bit on what you mentioned about the labor codes, because that is also something which is very important, and I think one needs to go ahead. Because when we talk about focusing on ease of doing business and reducing the cost of doing business, the obvious intent is to first start out with the low-hanging fruit and then go on to more complex reforms. And, in this country, what we need to do when it comes to labor reforms is to look beyond distilling it down to a simple hire and fire, because there is much more that these 4 labor codes achieve, provide protection to workers. They, make things a lot simpler. Compliance becomes a lot simpler. I mean, multiple rules and regulations and laws have been condensed down to 4 labor codes. And therefore, one hopes that there can be a consensus across the political spectrum to say that this is in the best interests of all concerned. And like I said, it's not to oversimplify it and sort of link it to the introduction of hire and fire in India. I don't think that's the intention at all. It does protect both employers and, more importantly, employees in terms of the from various aspects.
Right. Anish, I'm going to give you the final say. You did say that at this point in time, business confidence is strong and all of you are optimistic about the road ahead in terms of demand visibility. But if there were any specific pain points, and I've heard many talk about the lack of skilled manpower, for instance. On one hand, you're talking about the lack of jobs. On the other hand, industry is complaining about the lack of skilled manpower. If there are any specific concerns that you believe will move the needle to ensure that we continue to deliver on this 8% kind of growth rate, what would the priority list be for you from Budget 2024?
Shereen, I'm going to start with saying that 8% is not enough for India. We need to get into a much higher growth rate, ideally 10% plus, maybe 10 to 12 if we can get there. And we have the ability to do that. A lot of actions have been taken that I would look at as building blocks to enable this to happen. And we need to move faster on skills development. That's going to be critical for this to happen. We need to move faster on making manufacturing the lowest cost in the world, because India can be the manufacturing hub of the world. We have the ability to do that. And India today has a 3% share of global manufacturing. If we are to meet our Viksit Bharat goals, that has to go to 12%. And that really will be the boost for India in terms of its growth. And therefore, the key focus areas I'd look at are how do we get that to happen with lower cost manufacturing, higher quality, and more skills.
All right, gentlemen. Well, we will wait to see what the budget delivers when Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman rises to speak on the 23rd of July. And we'll have all of you gentlemen back with us to decode the budget in real time and the fine print in real time right here on CNBC TV 18. The expectations are that there be continuity, even though industry is not expecting radical reforms. The ask is for continuity and the ask is for stability in policy and ease of doing business. Anish Shah, Anant Goenka, Harsha, Subhrakant Panda, many thanks for joining us here on the CNBC TV 18 Budget Countdown. We will see you on the 23rd when the budget is delivered. We'll take a break here on CNBC TV 18. There's a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a moment with more.